Auctioned her right in front of the saloon, belly round with child, lips cracked from travel, eyes hollow with secrets. Some said she came from the desert. Others swore she'd wandered out of the hills barefoot, clutching a note pinned to her dress. Either way, by high noon, half the town had gathered. The auctioneer called her a burden with no clear father and no place to go. That's when the bidding began. A cattleman offered $5. A ranch foreman raised him. Then, unexpectedly, the sheriff himself stepped forward, face tight, voice low, and bid double. Gasps ran through the crowd. He never took part in these things. Never. The auctioneer called once, twice. Then the sheriff stopped him. "Don't say her name," he warned. "I know it, and if you speak it, I'll end this right now." What made the law break his own silence? And what was hidden in that woman's name? She came in walking crooked, one hand pressed against her back, the other shielding her eyes from the punishing sun. Her dress was ripped at the hem, boots caked with dry clay, and her belly, round and heavy, rose beneath the fabric like a stone under water. The mule that carried her part of the way had given out at the ridge. By the time she reached the town of Whipstone, the only thing holding her together was the silence on her lips and a faded square of cloth clutched in her hand. The merchant who rode into town beside her claimed he'd found her collapsed near the salt flats, half-starved and barely conscious. Said she had no name, no papers, and not a word to her voice. The town council asked around. No one knew her. She was listed as unclaimed property under the salvage statute. By morning, the mayor declared she would be sold at public auction to cover the cost of her care. They nailed a sign to the post outside the general store. One able-bodied woman with child. Auction at high noon. Below it, in crooked writing, someone added, silent, unknown, dangerous. No one erased it. Whipstone hadn't seen a sale like this in years, not since the war caravans stopped passing through. But by the time the sun stood overhead, nearly everyone had gathered near the gallows frame behind the saloon. Farmers, prospectors, drunks, and drifters leaned against fence posts trading guesses. "She's a runaway," one said. "Maybe an outlaw's widow." Another spat tobacco and muttered, "Looks like she killed someone and walked till the guilt gave out." The woman said nothing. She stood on the platform with her head bowed, both hands resting on her belly. She didn't cry, didn't plead, just breathed, slow, measured, calm like the still before a dust storm. The auctioneer stepped up and announced, "We got a soul in need of care and a town in need of funds. Bidding starts at $5. Murmurs ran through the crowd. A ranch hand raised his hand. A smirking trapper offered $6. The bids moved slowly, uneasily. Then the auctioneer, clearing his throat, turned to her and read aloud from a slip of paper pinned to the fabric she carried. Name listed here, Willa Rose Cadell. The crowd hushed, and from the edge of it, boots scraped on stone as Sheriff Eben Rover stepped forward. He didn't speak right away. His face had turned pale, like he'd seen a ghost walk into his town wearing the past on her shoulders. He stared up at the woman with a look no one could place. Then he raised his voice, not loud but sharp. "Stop the auction, now." The auctioneer blinked, still holding the hammer midair. "Sheriff, he stammered, eyes darting between Eben and the woman on the platform. "Town ordinance allows." "I said stop it," Eben repeated, his voice flat but final. "Step away from the block." A hush swept through the crowd. You could hear spurs settle in dirt, breath catch in throats. Nobody in Whipstone had ever seen Sheriff Eben Rover raise his voice. He didn't bark orders. He didn't draw fast. He just kept the peace by being the man no one wanted to test. So when he spoke now, even the drunks held their tongues. The auctioneer slowly lowered his hammer. "She's listed under salvage, Sheriff. No name, no coin, no kin." "She's got a name," Eben interrupted, eyes locked on the woman. "One you've got no business saying out loud." Willa, or the woman they called Willa, didn't flinch. She met the sheriff's gaze calmly, her eyes as still and deep as standing water. She seemed to be studying him as much as he studied her. The crowd waited. Then a rancher near the back shouted, "Well, hell, if she's got value, I'll bid 10." That stirred the others. Voices rose, laughter scattered like dry leaves. Another offer came, 12, then 15. Eben raised a hand, slow and deliberate. "I'll match it, 20. That shut them up. The sheriff bidding? That wasn't just unusual. That was unheard of. The auctioneer blinked, confused. "Sheriff, is this official or personal?" Eben stepped closer, now directly at the foot of the platform. "Let me make this clear," he said, his voice low but cutting. "Don't speak her name again. Not to me, not to anyone in this town. Because if you do, and if I find out it's been written, whispered, or wagered on..." He reached under his coat, resting his hand on the worn handle of his revolver. "There won't be a next auction." The silence that followed wasn't just respect, it was fear. The auctioneer stepped back. "Auction's off. Done." Eben turned to the woman and offered a hand. She didn't take it. But she did step down on her own, slowly, steadily, without needing a thing from anyone. He didn't speak as she walked beside him, down the road, past the staring eyes and quiet mouths. The crowd parted without resistance. And as they passed the gallows, someone whispered, "Who is she?" No one answered. But from the look on Eben's face, they knew. She wasn't for sale anymore. The road east of Whipstone wound through dust fields and brittle sage, ending at the skeleton of an old mission church. Roof half-caved, bell long stolen, walls cracked by sun and silence. Sheriff Eben brought her there instead of the jail, instead of his own home. Maybe he knew the town's eyes would follow her. Maybe he just knew this was where ghosts belong. He opened the door and motioned her in. She walked slowly, cautious but unafraid. The chapel floor creaked under her steps. The pews were mostly broken, but in the corner stood an old cot left behind by drifters. He gestured to it. "You'll be safe here for now." She said nothing, just eased herself down and rested both hands on her belly. Eben placed a canteen and a wrapped loaf of bread on the table. "Eat when you're ready. No one will bother you here." He turned to go but paused at the doorway. "Willa Rose Cadell," he said quietly. "That name was carved into a tree south of town 9 years ago, carved with mine." Her head lifted. "You knew her?" "I buried her." He didn't elaborate, just closed the door behind him. The woman, Wren, though no one yet knew it, sat in silence. The air was dry and heavy with old wood and dust, but it was the first time in weeks she hadn't felt watched. She took a sip of water, slowly as if remembering how to trust the taste. The bread stayed wrapped. That night, Eben returned and found her sitting by the altar, staring at the cracked crucifix. "You said you buried her," she murmured. "Was she alone?" Eben leaned against the doorframe. "No, I was with her. I held her hand. I didn't know it was goodbye." "She didn't die," the woman whispered. "Not right away." He stepped forward slowly. "Who are you?" She looked up at him. Not scared, not defensive, just tired. "You said her name like it hurt." "It did." She turned back to the altar. "Then maybe we both lost something." They didn't speak again that night, but when he left, he set a lantern outside the door and lit it, just in case the dark inside got too heavy. And inside the church, Wren Cadell, wearing her sister's name like armor, lay down and tried to sleep, for the first time in weeks, without running, without lying, and without knowing what came next. The next 3 days passed slow and heavy, like the heat that pressed down on Whipstone without mercy. Eben came at sunrise and again near dusk, bringing small comforts, biscuits, blankets, soap. He never asked questions, but his eyes lingered too long on her face, and each time he left, he seemed more unsure of what truth he was walking away from. Wren said little. She read the town from a distance, heard the voices outside the chapel, watched wagon wheels turn, saw women glance and whisper. She knew her presence stirred something the town wanted to keep buried, but she also knew it wasn't the child in her belly that made them uneasy. It was the name. On the fourth morning, She waited for Eben at the door. When he arrived, she stepped outside for the first time. "You said you buried her," she began, voice flat, but the ground never held her. He looked at her carefully. "You're not her." "No," she said. "I'm her sister." The wind stirred the dust at their feet. She kept her eyes steady. "My name is Ren Cadell. I was 9 when she vanished. They told me she ran, that she got caught in something bad. But I never believed it. I spent 7 years following names, false leads, dead ends. And then I found her name here. That's why I came." Aben's jaw clenched. He didn't look away. "She left with fire on her back. She was hunted. I couldn't stop it. I was too late." "She loved someone," Ren said softly. "But she never said who." Eben looked at her then, not as a stranger but as a memory resurfaced. "She wrote me letters," he said, voice low. "I never got to answer the last one." Ren placed a hand on her stomach. "She kept me safe once, sent me away before things turned dark. This child," she hesitated, "this child belongs to someone who tried to do the same for me. A man who died trying." They stood in silence as the old chapel bell tower groaned in the breeze. "I'm not here to stir up ghosts," she added, "but I can't keep wearing her name if it's going to bury me too." Eben nodded slowly. "Then let's start telling the truth, one piece at a time." That night, Ren no longer curled tight under the cot. She slept on top, uncovered, one hand resting on her belly, not because she was no longer afraid, but because she had begun to remember who she was, apart from loss. And the name Willa, though no longer hers, still echoed in the walls like something unfinished. The townsfolk of Whipstone didn't speak much of the sheriff's decision, but they sure looked at him different. A sideways glance at the post office. Long silences in the saloon. When Eben entered the Mercantile, voices stopped mid-sentence. The lawman who once stood apart from the filth was now seen knee-deep in it, sheltering a woman bought but not paid for, a woman who refused to speak her real past. The mayor, Silas McGarren, summoned Eben to the town hall. Inside the stuffy office, he waved a newspaper from Delcora County, marked with a half-smudged sketch. "Your mystery girl," Silas said, tapping the page. "Wanted for fraud 3 towns over. Name matches the one you stopped me from saying." Eben didn't flinch. "That sketch isn't her, and the law hasn't come calling." Silas leaned in, voice low. "You think people care if it's really her? The men who bid on her want compensation. The women want her gone. Keep protecting her, and this town will turn on both of you." Eben stood. "Then let them." By evening, whispers had turned to action. A group of 3 men, 2 ranch hands and a failed bounty hunter, gathered outside the chapel, passing around a bottle and a bad plan. They spoke of finishing the auction by nightfall. "Just take her," one said. "Nobody'll stop us." But they hadn't counted on Martha Braille. Martha, the town's midwife and weathered widow, still remembered what it cost to be a woman with no man to stand beside her. She brought Eben a note the next morning, scrawled and hurried. "They're watching the chapel. She's not safe there." Eben didn't ask twice. He wrote out, eyes sharp as flint, and by sundown, Ren had been moved to a trapdoor cellar behind Martha's herb shed. A cramped, dry place filled with dried lavender and empty pickle jars. But it was quiet. And safe. Ren didn't cry. She just sat in the dark, hands folded over her belly, listening to boots pass overhead. She had known this would come. People feared what didn't beg. She whispered her sister's name once in the dark, not as a prayer, but as a warning. Above her, Martha stirred the fire, kept the lamps low, and sat with a shotgun by the door. The town could whisper all it wanted, but no one would take another woman away, not while she breathed. The cellar was dark and cool, quiet except for the soft crackling of old herbs above. Ren stayed there for 3 days, tucked beneath the earth like something forgotten, something waiting to sprout again. Martha brought her tea, water, and bread. Eben came only once, late at night, to leave her a blanket and a lantern. He didn't knock, he didn't speak, but the silence between them carried a strange kind of safety. On the fourth morning, Wren opened the seams of the coat she had traveled in. The inside lining had always felt thick, heavier than it should. There, stitched deep in the cloth, was a folded scrap of paper, creased and yellowed with time. Her fingers trembled as she pulled it free. It was a letter. The handwriting was unmistakable. It was Willa's. "If you're reading this, little bird, then I didn't make it where I meant to go." Wren held her breath. "I took his name once, trusted a man I shouldn't have. It wasn't Eben. He was the only one who ever saw me for who I was and didn't try to own me. I ran because I was afraid. But I carried you in my heart, always." The rest of the letter blurred with her tears. She blinked hard and read it again. Willa hadn't run from Eben. She had run from someone else, someone who wore a badge but not honor. She died before she could make it back. Wren climbed the steps of the cellar and stepped into the morning sun. Martha tried to stop her, but Wren shook her head. "I need to show him." She found Eben at the edge of town, sitting by the river where the sycamores bent low. She handed him the letter, said nothing. He read it slowly, lips tight. When he looked up, his face had aged 10 years. "She never hated you," Wren said. "She wanted to come back." "I know," Eben whispered. "I just didn't know how to forgive myself for letting her leave." Wren sat beside him, hands folded over her child. "She gave me her name. It kept me alive. But I can't wear it anymore." Eben nodded. "You don't have to." They sat in silence for a long time, two people brought together by a name, but no longer chained to it. The river moved beside them, soft and steady. And for the first time since Whipstone laid eyes on her, Wren was not a mystery, not a rumor, not a story half told. She was herself again. The storm never came, not the angry mob, not the violence the town had quietly prepared for. Instead, Whipstone settled into a kind of uneasy quiet. The pregnant woman who'd once stood on the auction block simply vanished from public sight, and for many, that was enough. They stopped asking questions, or maybe they were just afraid of the sheriff's silence. Wren returned to the chapel, not to hide, but to choose where her story would continue. She swept out the dust, repaired the altar with her own hands, and lit candles at sundown, not for prayer, but for memory. This time, she didn't sleep in the shadows. She took the front pew and carved into the wooden beam with a pocket knife. "Wren Rose Kiddo. Not for sale." Martha came by often with soup and news. Eben came only once more. He stood in the doorway as the child slept in Wren's arms. She didn't look up. "I named him Willen," she said softly. "Part Willa, part me. He carries both, but he'll answer to himself." Eben nodded. "He'll be strong." Wren finally looked at him. "I'm not asking you for anything." "I know," he said. "That's why I came." They didn't speak of the auction, or the name, or what might have been. He tipped his hat, turned, and walked out into the sun, leaving behind a woman who had once been mistaken, misnamed, and nearly erased. And Wren, no longer a stranger, no longer someone else's ghost, held her son in her arms beneath the cracked ceiling of a church she had made her own. She wasn't bought. She wasn't broken. She stayed.